Danganronpa is one of my favorite series of all time. It's charming, funny, and has unique twists to the typical murder mystery genre thanks to the game's special rules in the class trial. In this series, 15 students are trapped in a school, and their only chance of escape is by murdering a fellow student. When a murder occurs, a class trial begins in order to find out the murderer, also known as the Blackened. If the students find out who the Blackened is, the Blackened will be executed, and if they aren't able to find the Blackened, then the Blackened escapes while everyone else dies. As a murder mystery visual novel, it contains plenty of, murders, and each of them comes with their own unique motive. These motives can range from completely justified to downright nonsensical, and everything in between. Today we'll be taking a look at those motives and rank them from worst to best. Now, before we start off this list, I would like to list a few ground rules. Number 1. This list will only be talking about the first 3 main series games. I will not be talking about Ultra Despair Girls or the D3 anime, as they do not contain a class trial system. Number 2. Any characters that commit suicide will be considered murderers on this list. Number 3. Characters that attempt murders will also be considered part of this list, even if they don't actually kill anyone. Number 4. If there is an accomplice to the murder, or 2 or more people team up in a murder, each participant will be ranked as their own separate murderer, even if only one of them is deemed the Blackened. Also, just because a character is deemed the Blackened, it doesn't necessarily mean I will deem them as the murderer. There are some cases where someone is deemed the Blackened due to very technical loopholes, so if you see any missing Blackened on this list, this is why. Number 5. All murders have to take place during the game to be put on this list, so Maki, Korekio, and Genocide Jack cannot be rated based on their past body counts. Oh, and one more thing before we get on to this list. This list will be based off of my own opinion and sense of morality, so please do not take this list as an objective one. Feel free to share your own opinions in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Also, I am ranking fictional murders, so just because I treat one of the murderers as justified doesn't necessarily mean that I would defend it in real life. Now, without further ado, let's start this list, starting with what I deem to be the worst motive for a killer in the Danganronpa series.
Celestia Ludenberg! Actually, Taiko Yasuhiro is fine.
Spoiler alert, all the Case 3 culprits are going to be back to back on this list. For some odd reason, every Case 3 culprit has to have the most unlikable, most nonsensical, least justified murderer in their respective game. It's like the more people you kill, the less justified you are in doing so. The question is, now, which of these pieces of trash is the worst out of the garbage bin? It took only a couple of minutes for me to decide that Celestia Ludenberg has the worst motive of the 3. In Case 3 of Trigger Happy Havoc, Monokuma establishes the motive that, if a student kills someone now, they will get $10 million, or the yen equivalent to that amount. Celeste decides to kill both Taka and Hifumi so that she can use that money to, get this, live in a castle in order to fulfill her gothic Lolita aesthetic. There are a couple reasons why I chose her as worse than the other 2 culprits. The first of which is that the other 2 culprits are clearly bonkers and need to seek help. Both of them have such a twisted view on reality that, to their own little world, they think they are doing nothing wrong. Celeste, on the other hand, is much more sane, and should have a firm grasp of what's right and wrong. The fact that she has the mental capacity to trick Hifumi into being an accomplice and devise an intricate plan involving Yasuhiro and robots means that she also has the mental capacity to understand that aesthetic is a non-existent reason to commit not 1, but 2 murders. Another reason why Celeste's motive is worse than the other 2 is because, in a straw-grasping way, both Mikon and Kyo were killing in someone else in mind. Mikon was killing for her beloved Junko, while Korekio was killing for his dead sister. Because of this, you could potentially argue that both of them were acting in the name of selflessness, if you stretch hard enough. Celeste, on the other hand, was only thinking about herself and her superficial needs. That's it. One more reason as to why Celeste has the worst motive out of the 3 is the fact that there is no reason for her plan to involve a double murder. Mikon and Kyo had double murders because they wanted to kill as many people as possible. Celeste only needed to kill Hifumi to enact her plan, so why on earth did she have to kill Taka as well? What, did she think that the more people she killed, the more money she'd get? Overall, Celeste's motive for killing Hifumi and Taka is both nonsensical and unsympathetic. I cannot find a single redeemable trait when it comes to this motive, and I was able to find one for the rest of the Case 3 culprits, so that's saying something. Speaking of Case 3 culprits...
My beloved was the only one who never hated me.
Next up on the Case 3 culprits with terrible motives is Mikon Tsumiki from Danganronpa 2, Goodbye Despair. In it, she gains a disease that makes her remember her true identity as an ultimate despair, and then proceeds to kill people in the name of her beloved, Junko Enoshima. Now, I've already stated why she's higher on the list than Celeste, but the reason why she's below Kyo is because, even though she doesn't think she's doing anything wrong, she's still doing it essentially because she wants to and it makes her feel tingly. That's it. At least Kyo had somewhat of a justification, even if it is very insignificant. Also, Kurikyo's devotion to his sister is a little more justifiable in terms of a motive than Mikon's crush on Junko. Again, this distinction would be meaningless if I didn't have to rate the two of them, but here we are.
It's full of doubts, of mysteries, of a dense, impenetrable fog! Nothing is clear at all!
Okay, we're at the last of the Case 3 culprits, and you guys might be scratching your heads as to why I chose him as the most justified out of the three, especially since he's the butt of most Danganronpa jokes. And trust me, I have my reasons, even if they are a bit small. In Case 3 of V3, Kyo kills both Angie and Tenko in order for his deceased sister to get friends in the afterlife. I don't really need to explain why this is a terrible motive, but I do have to explain why I ranked it over the other Case 3 culprits. Again, it has to do with the fact that Kyo is balls to the wall insane and thinks what he's doing is morally sound. Celeste was only thinking about money while Mikon was trying to spread despair across the island. So having a character at least think he is making friends for his deceased sister he shouldn't have feelings for doesn't sound nearly as bad compared to the motives that have nothing moral about them whatsoever. Usually stuff like this wouldn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but since these Case 3 murder motives are all equally terrible, you have to look at the little things in order to make the distinction big enough to actually rate one over the other. Also, past body counts do not come into equation when discussing his motive here, since I only rate killings that happen in the games. With these rules, I only consider his double murder, and not his massive body count of over 90. Okay, now that I went over all the Case 3 culprits and why they are terrible, I would think that the upcoming motives would start making sense. And they do! But there's just one more character that has an absolutely stupid motive to kill. One almost as bad as the Case 3 trio motives. I said almost, since, even though the next motive is pretty dumb, it takes a certain level of garbage to be comparable to a Case 3 motive, and I don't think it's bad enough to get to that level. I think.
In the name of sparkling, shining justice, I have come to deliver justice!
In Case 2 of Danganronpa 2, Mahiru was friends with Sato, the girl who killed Fuyuhiko's sister. This makes Fuyuhiko really angry at her, and since Peko serves under him, she kills Mahiru in order to avenge his sister and place her as the Blackened, so Fuyuhiko can survive. That sounds pretty noble of her, except for the fact that Fuyuhiko wasn't planning on killing Mahiru in the first place. Even if Fuyuhiko wanted to kill Mahiru, he told Peko time and time again that he does not want to share this mafia business relation with her while they are on the island, and that he wants Peko to treat herself as an equal to him. Oh, and it just gets dumber from here. In the class trial, once everyone starts rightfully suspecting Peko, she then blames Fuyuhiko for her crime since she is apparently a tool, as if that were supposed to be a compliment to him. And for some reason, Fuyuhiko still respects Peko after that little stunt of hers, even going as far as to defend her actions in court. If I were him, I'd fire her from being my mafia servant. If that's even how it works. I don't know anything about Yakuza. No matter how stupid this plan is, though, there's still some positives to it that put it above all the Case 3 motives. For one, Peko is doing something that a rational person could actually argue is selfless without being laughed at for being objectively wrong. Honestly, her motive would have been a genuinely noble one if Fuyuhiko clearly wanted Mahiru to die and was actively planning out a murder, and just when he was about to kill Mahiru, Peko steps in and does it instead. Now, I've heard people say that that's what happened, but I looked into it to double check myself, and it just appears to be fan interpretations and not stated in text, so I will go into my original opinion. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. However, since Fuyuhiko wasn't going to do that, it just makes Peko look like a complete idiot that acts without thinking. Because of this one aspect, this otherwise noble motive to kill turned into one of the worst motives in the entire series, being only above the Case 3 motives. Don't worry though, this is the last of the downright nonsensical motives. These next motives are going to be a little more reasonable.
Sorry, man. I couldn't keep the promise we made.
from one man to another.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. How could you possibly put Mando, one of the most sympathetic murderers, next to characters like Peko and the Case 3 culprits? Well, let me explain. In Case 2 of Trigger Happy Havoc, the motive of this case is embarrassing secrets, one of which being that the small and dainty Chihiro is actually a boy. Motivated by this, Chihiro decides to train and get fit so that when the time comes, he'll be comfortable and confident enough to tell the truth. While he goes into the boys' locker room to train, he meets Mando and tells him his plan. This heavily distresses Mando because he knows he hasn't gotten himself to face his own troubles, that of his brother's death, which gets him into an intense rage, killing Chihiro in the process. Now, this murder is much different from the rest of the murders discussed, since this would be a case of voluntary manslaughter, which would count as a different crime than murder, at least in the US. Most of the culprits in Danganronpa perform first-degree murder, which is a murder that is planned out and enacted. Voluntary manslaughter is when one has no prior intent of murder and that the murder is enacted when an otherwise rational person acts in an emotionally unstable manner in the heat of the moment. This is different from second-degree murder in which, although there are no prior murderous intent, the murderer made the deliberate choice to kill in that moment. An example of second-degree murder would be Leon's murder, which I will discuss later on this list. This means that Mando probably didn't even want Chihiro to die, so why am I putting his murder next to the worst of the worst? Well, the point of this list is to rank the motives of the murders, and what worse of a motive to have than to have no motive at all? Another way of explaining this would be that I am ranking the motives based on how justified they are. Mando's case of voluntary manslaughter, while tragic, is so unjustified that Mando himself believes it's unjustified. If Chihiro was in a different place at a different time, he might still be alive, or at least not killed by Mando. The fact that Mando's murder is just a series of unfortunate events rather than a plan with a motive makes it so low on the list.
Cause Junko and Oshima is...
Me! Junko fucking Enoshima!
Now, you may have noticed that this particular slot is shared between two culprits, and no, I didn't do it because Tsumugi constantly talked about Junko and the fact that they're both masterminds. It turns out that they share similar motives as well. Junko kills her lookalike twin, Mukuro, since she broke the rule of hitting Monokuma, while Tsumugi killed Rantaro since Kaede's plan to kill him failed. Both murders happen in order to keep the killing game going, with no other reason besides that. The reason why both are so low is because, similar to Mando's, there is not much of a motive for their murders. However, the reason why these two motives are higher than Mando's is because they were 100% intentional, which, in an ironic sense, makes Mukuro's and Rantaro's deaths more justified than Chihiro's. Now that we've mentioned the murderers that more or less lack a motive altogether, the next motives on this list will be deeply flawed, but still have good intentions behind them. Starting with...
Really? Did Ganta really do it?
Now, when I was first writing this list, the next three characters were in very different places, but looking back on it now, as well as gaining some new information on one of the motives, I decided to change things up a little. To be fair though, this was a very difficult decision for me to make, as these three motives are practically interchangeable. In Case 4 of V3, Miu was killed in a virtual world, and people are starting to wonder who the killer is. Angry about something I don't remember, Kokichi blurts out the real killer, Gonta, and no one believes him. Not even Gonta himself knows he's the killer due to memory loss. You'd think this would cause the murderer to have an unknown motive, but at the end of the trial, Gonta's motive is revealed through the Gonta in the virtual world retaining his virtual memories. In it, he states that he killed Miu in order for her to never find out the horrible truth that Kokichi told him, being that they are the last people alive and that humanity is doomed. Gonta, as well as the next two culprits on this list, share a common theme of intentional murder due to a misunderstanding, typically caused by someone else, meaning they would probably never killed anyone if the truth was more clear. Initially, Gonta was going to be 2 spaces higher on this list due to the fact that Kokichi egged him on to do it and that Gonta's prediction was kind of right. The class of V3 completely fell into despair once they figured out they are the last people alive, and, to Gonta at the time, it would have been better off if they died ignorant of the horrible truth. However, there are a couple things that I believe are flawed with Gonta's motive. First of all, even though Kokichi basically coerced Gonta into killing Miu, I still feel like the fact that Gonta agreeing to kill Miu to protect her from the truth was a pretty flawed decision on his part. This is not to say that Ganta went out of his way to kill Miu, or that Kokichi wasn't largely at fault. I still feel like this motivation is pretty sympathetic. Ganta is, no offense, pretty dumb and impressionable, and considering the amount of despair he was currently in, he didn't have much time for rational thought. That being said, I am not really a fan of the idea of mercy killing, or killing someone for their own good. I feel like the murderer believes they know what's better for the victim than the victim themselves. In my opinion, the only person's fate that one can control over is their own, and even then, suicide isn't always the option either. Another reason why I believe that Gonta's motive is more flawed than the other two is that, even though he was initially right, Gonta's friends were able to get over that massive despair and move on to the future. Ganta should have had more trust in his friends that they could handle the truth, even when it seems like they're better off not knowing. This is something that Ganta could have been able to do while the next two on this list couldn't. Speaking of which...
I remember everything before I met you all.
While the other two characters I discussed earlier were switched around, it seems like this specific culprit stayed in exactly the same spot at number 12, albeit for different reasons than before. In case 3 of Trigger Happy Havoc, Celeste tells Hifumi that his love rival, Taka, not only harmed her, but kidnapped his computer GF alter ego, and that he is planning on both hurting him and killing Hifumi. Distraught by this injustice, Hifumi goes along with Celeste's plan and kills Taka, completely unaware that he fell right into her trap. Initially, I had Hifumi be below Ganta on this list, both because Gonta's murder was more in the heat of the moment, and that Gonta's motive and his character are more sympathetic than Hifumi's. However, I believe there are two distinct aspects to Hifumi's murder that make his motive distinctly more justified than Gonta's. The first being that, unlike with Ganta, there was a serious sense of urgency and danger that drove Hifumi to do what he did. Ganta killed to hide his friends from the horrifying truth, but there wasn't an exact time that his friends had to see said truth. Ganta could have stalled for time by hiding the flashback light or having his bug friends protect it so that no one would get to it. Sure, it wasn't a permanent solution, and his friends would get suspicious of him quick, but it gives him a chance to think of the best possible solution for this problem. Hifumi, on the other hand, did not have time for that. If he doesn't act quick and agree to Celeste's plan, both Hifumi and Alter Ego's lives would be on the line. Another reason why I believe that Hifumi's motive is ultimately more justified has to do with the person doing the deceit. Kokichi is notorious for being a liar and someone not to be trusted, even if he is telling the truth. Listening to Kokichi and believing in him is like playing a game of Russian roulette. Even Ganta knows this, so he really shouldn't have listened to and agreed to what he said, because the potential risk of doing so is much greater than any potential benefit. In contrast, Hifumi constantly fawns over Celeste and sees her as someone who could do no wrong, so there really isn't a reason for Hifumi not to trust her. Plus, with how strange Taka has been acting recently, the possibility of him actually harming someone wouldn't completely be out of the question. Overall, even though it was a difficult decision, I still feel like putting Hifumi over Ganta was the right choice for me to do, and I feel like I gave some pretty good reasons as to why I made that decision. Now, you may have noticed that I have mentioned one more murderer that got their place switched around, and you're probably wondering who that murderer is and what their motives are. Well then, you're in luck, because you're about to find out.
Now then, let's begin! The beginning of the end of Jabberwock Island!
When I first made this list, I actually put Nagito at number 12, below both Ganta and Hifumi. However, after re-evaluating my opinion, as well as gaining new information about his motive, my perspectives changed, and Nagito's motive went from being worse than Ganta and Hifumi's to being better than both of them. So what happened? In case 4 of Goodbye Despair, Nagito finds out that he, as well as the rest of the class, were affiliated with Junko as Ultimate Despairs. He gets so mad at this fact that he BDSMs himself to death in such an intricate and convoluted way that, through a combination of magical luck powers and class trial loophole, makes the only person who is not a Despair technically commit the murder, but is also in a way so that the Blackened and everyone else has no idea she's the Blackened, meaning that there's a high statistical chance they will get the Blackened wrong. And if they do, not only will everyone die, but the only good person gets to leave, effectively killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Whew, boy, that was a mouthful. Essentially, Nagito's motive was to find the one working for Future Foundation while killing everyone else, starting with him. Remember how I said back in the beginning of this video that not everyone who is the Blackened is the killer? Well, this is the case I'm referring to. Even though Chiaki is deemed the blackened and punished accordingly, she is obviously not the killer here. Saying so would be like saying Makoto solves the class trials all by himself. It's just objectively false. Even in the most corrupt courts of Japan, the prosecution, defense, judge, and jury would all nod in unison stating that this is a suicide and not a murder. In a way, Nagito killed Chiaki since his actions led directly to Chiaki's death, even when that's the opposite of its intentions. Now, initially, I ranked Nagito below Hifumi and Gonta because I was under the misconception that Nagito knew who the traitor was beforehand, so I thought he could just talk to it about her, revealing the misconception. However, this isn't the case, as Nagito only used his luck to determine who the traitor is, making this motive a lot more justifiable than previously thought. Along with the sense of urgency I discussed with Hifumi's motive, the main reason why Nagito is both above Hifumi and Gonta has to do with the shared theme of misconception that all three murders have. Gonta didn't think the gang would survive from the truth, Hifumi thought that Celeste was telling the truth, and Nagito didn't know the reason the Ultimate Despairs were on the island was so that they could be reformed. If Gonta or Hifumi got told that they were being set up by someone they trust, they would most likely not go through with the murder, realizing their mistake. Nagito would either assume that the person telling him that is a Despair making things up to let his guard down, or he would believe the person, but still go through with the plan anyways because he believes people like the Despairs shouldn't deserve a shot at redemption. Either way, the fact that there is a sizable chance that Nagito would still perform his mass murder even being aware of the misconception he previously had makes his motive the most justified out of the previous three listed. Alright, I think I'm gonna take a break here. This list is going to be pretty long, so that's why I'm dividing it into two parts. The first part discussed the less justified half of the culprits. The second part will talk about the motives I find more justified than not. I hope you'll catch the video when it comes out, and I'll be seeing you later.